over the past few hours, we've been talking a lot about how can enterprises step into this space of blockchain adoption. And as Andy has just said, it has been a rather painful road for enterprises, and it's definitely not easy. So what I'd like to do over the next 30 minutes, maybe a bit less if there's time for questions, to talk very practically from the perspective of an enterprise of how can they actually embrace decentralization. So imagine that in the audience there are representatives of enterprises who are interested in what we're talking about, and there's a lot of synergy between what the four of us actually talk about and what we do. And I'd like this discussion to be really hands-on and practical. So I'm going to start from a simple question, I think simple yet difficult. And we sort of said about the value of decentralization already, but for many enterprises, it's still a bit of an abstract concept. So Maria, why would you say it is important for enterprises to decentralize? What's it for them? You know, they've been running their business over the years and it's been successful, and, you know, why should I really care if I'm an enterprise to decentralize?
I wouldn't probably putting it that way, sorry. I probably won't say let's decentralize, but I would probably say, look, there are technological waves. We have seen them from Web 0, so nothing, to Web 1, and we had the internet, and we were looking at it like, what do I do with that? And then some enterprises had the ideas to set up their online shops. So before that, we didn't have any online shops. So they used that technology to do something new and to reach a wider audience. That's what happened then, right? So that was, then from there, we moved to even larger enterprises and platforms. The Web 2 grew a lot bigger, and Amazon, they didn't start as Amazon as we know today, selling storage and everything, but they started as selling books, right? So you start with something simple with the technology that you have, you explore with it, and you then build your business around that. So that's what they have done very successfully. I'm not sure there is much more space for new hyperscalers in the Web 2. I think the place is taken. So the question is, if you want to grow and you've missed maybe the Web 1, Web 2, some companies have missed that, I would argue, then you probably want to look into the Web 3 and see how you can leverage that. And I would say try a few things. You will fail with some. You will probably hopefully succeed with some others. But without trying it, you will not know. So my suggestion would be to encourage others to look beyond what is currently available. Think in a peer-to-peer value exchange way, because that's what Web3 brings, and then explore that.
Do you want to comment, Raquel?
Yes. So I think certainly part of the whole innovation drive across enterprises today needs to really look at new business models. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about staying within your comfort zone of what's inside your own corporate boundary, but expanding into new areas of business that potentially could have you be part of that, what Andy was saying, be part of a bigger pie. Mm-hmm. Maybe a smaller slice of that bigger pie, but still part of that bigger pie. So this exploration into decentralization for our enterprise needs to be grounded in what additional value that could create for that enterprise. What are the new business models that could potentially be explored as a result of having decentralization around their data, decentralization around their product services, decentralization around their organization. So I do think there's an opportunity for hybrid organizations to come into play where they have their traditional organizational model, you know, built on profit for themselves, but then exploring some of these concepts around how can we actually generate more collective value? What is the role that my organization can play to drive a bigger economy or ecosystem value as a result of advances in technology, to what Maria was saying earlier, as well as what Andy was mentioning around the whole consumer behavior aspect of it. I'm actually really interested to understand what Andy's going to say.
Right. Yeah.
Well, so I don't think we're talking about rip and replace. You know, I'm so old, I can remember putting in ERP systems, and I never want to do that again. So when we talk about decentralization and the digital economy, I think we're building something on top of your core business. So yes, we can use this technology to maybe optimize your core business, take some cost out, prepare some data to be tokenized. But I think the real magic occurs in building a new economy, a new digital economy. And the question was, well, why decentralize? And I think it fundamentally comes down to the question, do you have all the data needed to solve this on your own? And my hypothesis is, if I look at all of the really big problems around the world which we need to solve, and which we need to work together to solve, no one person has that data. So the only way to do that is to collaborate with other enterprises to pool that data so you can solve it. It's almost like the unit of competition is becoming a collaboration. And then the second piece to this, why decentralized, which I think is fundamentally important, is the role of the consumer. And I think kids today, have been beaten up with the Facebook model, and they don't want to see that again. And the Facebook model was just marketing data. We're now talking about your health data, the car data, really valuable data. And I think the only way that we're going to get real participation is if you feel that the consumer can feel some control over what's happening and how how the monetization is working. So I think this is a new economy, which is, on addition to your existing business, it may in time evolve to replace your existing business, but it's not a rip and replace.
I also just wanted to add to that. I agree with that, and I also think that there will be a new opportunities for the gig economy, right? Mm-hmm. And yes, for the people to actually bring their services and make them available to probably larger either ecosystems or different areas, right? And this has to come through the decentralizations, because I think at the moment they're paying this extra 20-30% to join some platform. But if we will allow them to become known without joining a certain platform, whether it's Airbnb or Uber or something else, then you gain that value back. You gain that as a consumer and also as the service provider, right? You can split that half and half, and that's where part of where the value comes.
You talked about that, Raquel, as well, building that inclusive business environment as well, right? To creating space to onboard the smaller businesses. Not necessarily at the cost of, the business of somebody else, but actually where everybody gets that value. And that brings me to my second question. So we talk a lot about how the future should look like, what an ideal scenario looks like, but it's a painful road ahead, I think, at least. I'm there on a daily basis. And the question to you, Raquel, to start with, but I'm sure all of you can contribute, is how do we start? Like, how should this roadmap look like? What are the starting points that enterprises should take to enter that roadmap?
So first, I think definitely it's around, there's three things that I'm thinking about now. So one is absolutely, what is the value created? So if we always center ourselves on what is the value that we're trying to drive, that also permeates as the mission statement for what exactly are the initiatives and how the models of how we would actually act. So one is absolutely value creation. The second is value capture. How do we then, even if we understand the business case and we understood what it is that we're trying to create as value, how can you effectively capture it to the full extent? So and that's an iterative process, right? Because you start and then you pivot, you adjust. So that value capture piece is important because that drives momentum. It's just like in any startup, right? I was in the startup world for 8 years before getting acquired by IBM. So it was all around how you successfully generate and promote the momentum within the initiative that people can still keep believing. They believe that you can continue to do it. And then I think the third thing is really around how do you drive the ecosystem? Because effectively, once you have determined and solved a particular, generated some value within a particular area, what other replicability of that same initiative can be done, maybe across, your competitors within your industry, or maybe even across industry participation that can complement and even extend the value that originally has been developed there. So I think it is really around, first of all, identifying what is the value that you're going to create, understanding exactly how you're going to capture that and create a mechanism to obviously iterate and improve upon that capture of value. And then thirdly, how you make that value more widely available to a broader set of ecosystem partners. You can start with your own,
Right.
and then maybe that will be the springboard to cross-industry innovation. I think this is where it really cements.
And Maria, you and in collaboration, you as Fetch, and in collaboration with Bosch, you take actions to build these minimal viable ecosystems, as we call them, in a safe sandbox environment. Is that a way forward?
Correct, yeah, and that's one way forward. So we are participating in the new project called Move ID, which is led by Bosch, and it brings together almost 20 participants from the mobility space. So Bosch, but also their direct competitor Denso, right, from Japan, and several others that are part of that, and coming together and saying, okay, so how do we take these new technologies? How do we take the SSI, so self-sovereign identities, and put them on the vehicles, put them on the infrastructure, and by doing that, we will then connect them. The aim is to connect them with the agents and let them communicate with each other. So the aim of that project is really to enable self-sovereign identity for machines, for vehicles, for infrastructure, and then have that V2V, so vehicle to vehicle, a vehicle V2X, vehicle to X, so vehicle to infrastructure communication, right? And we will see where that goes. And yes, through these small but real world examples is how we aim to really bring these new technologies to the real world and in real machines.
Mm-hmm. And Andy, I have a sort of spin-off of that question to you. So we talk a lot about the infrastructure that needs to come up in order to enable these new use cases and sort of, as you say, open the valve for these use cases, right? And we talk about decentralized identity, credentials, DIDs, tokenization. How do you see the roadmap for infrastructure development? Do we first need to put data on the blockchain or connect our data to the blockchain, and that's the foundation layer? Or is there one piece of infrastructure that is critical to enable all that?
Well, so if I think about infrastructure, I'm going to go back to the Industrial Revolution, and I'm going to talk railways. And anybody who's English will know we built two gauges, broad gauge and narrow gauge. And surprise, surprise, it didn't work when you wanted to move rolling stock from one railway to another. And in the end, we had to rip up the narrow gauge. I think it was the broad gauge that won. So when we think about infrastructure, we really want to be thinking about interoperability, about standards, and about governance. All the things that have always been a problem. What do we call something? What data models are we going to have? What standard processes should we have? When you look at where bridges have gone wrong, for example, and smart contracts have gone wrong in the past, very often it's the governance around the technology that has failed. So I think, so the question was about infrastructure. So I think there's a real need for industries to get together to start defining the governance models for how industries are going to function. And we really want everybody to be on the same gauge, broad gauge rather than narrow gauge. But we have to be able to cope with that interoperability if we end up with two platforms. But I think it's all about governance and about agreeing how industries want to collaborate in the future. So for me, I know that that's more business rather than technology, but I think that's the most important infrastructure element that I see missing when I look at projects.
Okay, so infrastructure then comes on top of that. And then the next question to you, and that's something that interests me in particular, is what according to you is the future of consortia? So, we have in this enterprise blockchain world, we have established that model as a governance model. But we're seeing, and you said that as well, that it's maybe not the most optimal way of regulating, this space across a network. You talk a lot about DAO as an alternative. So my question is, what is your perspective on consortia these days? Is that a sort of this model is dead? And if you see alternatives, can you give us examples of how a DAO could work on an enterprise level, very hands-on?
So we have, the way I look at it, we have old world and new world. And we mustn't underestimate the importance of the old world, because what the enterprise is sitting on is really valuable, which is all the data about the world as it is, which needs to be tokenized and needs to be made available to smart contracts to then drive all the innovation that we're interested in. But it's no use unless we've built out those foundations. So I think we start by saying, as a community, as an ecosystem, enterprises have to be able to collaborate enough to create that baseline of shared data. And because you're really fixing problems in the world as it is, there's an opportunity to use that consortium approach to get that common view of the truth of critical data between buyer and seller. But we're not fundamentally doing anything that different from what we've always done in the past. We're just baselining and getting that really good data to then tokenize. But you can still get some optimization and some cost-saving benefits there. So that's a valid construct, but it's really in the old world. If we really want to fix the problems, though, we have to, I think, move into this new world where you can really grow out those network effects. Because one of the problems with consortia is it's very difficult to get competitors to come onto the same network. Whereas if we're using Ethereum and building on Ethereum, for example, then everybody is already there. We don't have that competition problem because everybody's already on Ethereum, for example. So then we can build our decentralized autonomous organization on top of Ethereum, and we can suck in that data from the old world to then use in our smart contracts. And the thing that the enterprises are always worried about is losing control. And I think that just because you're doing this in an automated fashion or semi-automated fashion through smart contracts doesn't mean you have to start fully decentralized. I think you can actually start quite centralized on your DAO. Because after all, you are governing the rules of the issuance of the voting tokens, which are probably in some way related to that DAO native token, which we're using for pricing and for buying and selling on the marketplace. So I think you can actually start quite centralized. But of course, that's just to start and to get going. You're only really going to start solving the problems that you're looking to tackle if you open that valve up and you let everybody in. And I think it's managing that movement to the right of my graph as you move from experimentation, as you move from driving liquidity to then genuinely creating these new marketplaces. And I think that's the journey that the enterprise should set out on. So yes, you can fix the world as it is, and you can do that in a traditional sort of central database, private permissioned network, that's fine. But as you really start wanting to collaborate on the new railway, everybody needs to have a chance to join that. So we're probably going to be building out on something like Ethereum, a public network. But you can start quite decentralized with your DAO you're building on that network, but you're only going to really grow the pie if you're prepared to give up some control and open up. So that's my perspective.
I have a comment on that as well. Maybe a real world example, actually, more than anything else, which I think is interesting for us to maybe explore together, right? So who in the room has heard of TradeLens? Not very many people. Okay, so TradeLens effectively was a network that was built between built by Maersk, enabled by IBM, which effectively digitized the whole logistics shipping container industry. So they basically had a number of different, so they had three major shipping containers as the anchor clients there. They created a consortium around how to actually build out this whole digitization of this logistical supply chain, very complex. They then started to open that up to a number of different, customs houses, ports, all of the different participants for shipping containers, which are many. And they had one specific challenge which happened early on within the evolution of TradeLens, which was they didn't get a lot of participants on the blockchain because they were not a lot of the economic conditions or the commercial incentives to actually join were heavily towards the anchor companies rather than new companies that were coming in. So the incentive model was incorrect. They changed that, scrapped the whole governance charter, rewrote the governance, Andy, you know this very well probably. They rewrote that governance charter, and suddenly, within probably 9 to 10 months of that governance charter being rewritten, 63% of the world's shipping volume was landing on TradeLens. And about 4-5 months ago now, maybe 6 months ago, TradeLens announced on their website that they were closing down. So let's think a little bit about what the difference could have been if there were this adoption potentially of a decentralized autonomous organization and voting with tokens across the whole participant chain. Could they actually have, first of all, captured the value earlier in their journey and also created a sustainable business out of it?
Exactly, and for companies more involved in the B2C angle, it could be also a leverage of empowering your community a bit more if you shift some of the, maybe not all of, not half, but a little bit of a portion of a control also to your community. I find that very interesting. And Maria, do you have any comment on the programmability of a governance layer at all?
I think I have I would say comment in general. If you make a win-win situation, if you allow people to make money or gain some other benefit, I think you will, engage them. So I think we still we have a little bit more ways to go to make it more accessible, these new technologies. But I think once they reach the, consumers, so the supply and demand, the sellers and the buyers in a way that they can use it more efficiently in an easier way, I think we will probably see a really big change. So at least that's what we're trying to do, but we're encouraging others to do that as well, because we keep talking about it. We have all these presentations. I did want to show you the demo. It didn't work because of the whatever computer, but I think what we really need to actually give people the tools, and they have been quite clunky, so let's give them something that they can play with and experience that, and if they see the benefit of, like I said, either some monetization, so economic benefit, or like the benefit we get from ChatGPT, it does something for us. So if we give them that and they see that as beneficial, they'll adopt it. It's my opinion. And that it's whether it's consumers or whether it's enterprises and others, they will try to experiment with it, and they will do that for a little while, and then the market forces will determine what happens.
Value first. So I actually would want to open the floor to questions right now. We have some time.
Could you explore more why this TradeLens has finished?
Well, I think fundamentally you wouldn't, so I'm not privy to all of the different conversations, right? But if we think about it, why would any business shut its doors? Because they weren't making money, fundamentally, right? They weren't making enough money to overcome the cost of actually supporting the platform. So I think it really comes back down again to the commercial model, the incentive model. So number one is how can you create a self-financing ecosystem or a self-financing network? And obviously, you probably have comments on this as well, Andy, but how can you create a self-sustaining business that's going to thrive in the face of maybe increasing costs of supporting that business? Andy, I don't know if you have comments on.
Well, so I would come down to the word power or control. and I would say there was a misbalance of the power between the shipper and the carrier. So the shipper, that's the person that's sending the stuff out, was actually reluctant to share all of their data with the carriers because they were worried that the carriers were then going to eat into their business. So yes, we got 63% of the carriers onto the network, but it's only of use if you get the shipper as well to push the transactions through. So I think it was about the governance model design and about having a fair balance of power between the various actors. And I think there was too much power with the carrier and not enough power with the shipper. So the shipper was saying, well, I'm not happy to put my data on there because I'm not happy that the carrier isn't going to eat into my business.
So I would just like to add to that. So if there was, imagine a situation that they were making some predictive models, right? And then the carriers and the shippers would all collaborate together, build that model together, and then, right, and the data providers, the data would stay with them, but they would be incentivized to contribute to building that model, and all together they would own it, and then they would sell it to others, not the model, but these predictions that come out of the model, just like ChatGPT, that's predictions, that's your insights, right? So this is where I like to see the future going, where we together build, models, AI models together, and then sell the outcomes of them as the output, as a service to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
There's one example of a successful one, which is not necessarily founded on blockchain, but it is a data marketplace, which is Skywise by Airbus for the airline industry. So you basically have Airbus, who is one of two major airline manufacturers in the world, right? Who effectively partnered with specific airlines, I think 17 of them at the very start, to build a data platform around airlines. So there's where you have that collaborative capability where participants were incentivized to share their data for the value that they were getting out of that platform itself. So if you wanted to take a look at an example of a data platform where that's working, Skywise by Airbus is one. I think we do have another question there in the audience too.
Yeah, and it's a follow-up question regarding TradeLens. So regarding what you just said, do you believe that changing the model of TradeLens into a regular DAO model would help the company survive? And a second question, what do you think about companies like IBM investing millions of dollars into projects like TradeLens and then trying to change them into DAOs? How do you perceive this process? Because DAO is a decentralized model. This is not a regular centralized company like IBM is. So how do you perceive companies like IBM actually moving some of their most expensive products into a DAO model?
Andy, do you have a comment on that first, and then?
Well, so I'm not going to answer your question directly. I don't think I can, other than to say I think it always comes down to incentives, which for me, the incentive design is a core part of the governance model design. So if you design your governance model and your incentives in such a way that everybody has a fair incentive to collaborate, then you have a chance of achieving that collaboration. Now, then the question is, what is the technology that you need underneath that to support that fair economic model? And it's my belief that that needs to be as open as possible. And the governance model needs to be as open as possible. And I think the only way to achieve that level of openness is on permissionless rails. And I think the way that we would govern that would be through that DAO structure.
I'm just going to jump in here because we're dramatically running out of time. And I have one quick question to the three of you, and you have to answer with one word only. Which industry do you think is going to adopt the stuff that we're talking about first? Which one is the ripest, the most ready? Go to market people, listen carefully.
I'm going to need more than 0 minutes, 0 seconds to think about this.
Andy, do you have an opinion?
Well, I unfortunately have worked in every single industry, and the easy answer is to say financial services.
Yeah.
That's it, Maria.
I just want to say gig economy.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I gotta show up for my core industry, right, which is telco. It's going to be a tough haul. It's going to be a tough haul. But I do think that telcos are incredibly positioned in terms of connectivity, ecosystem, and customer weight, concentration, that they could maybe do something. It only takes one. It just has to, one innovator, and then the rest will be fast followers.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to say.
And I'll go with automotive. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.